Joe Biden does 60 Minutes. Martha's Vineyard survives its migrant influx. And is the pandemic truly, officially over? We'll discuss all this more on this edition of The Editors. I'm Rich Lowry, and I'm joined as always by the Right Honorable Charles C.W. Cook, Jackie B. Jack Butler, and the Sage of Authenticity Woods, Jim Garrity. You are, of course, listening to a National Review podcast. Our sponsors are Net Choice, Quip, and Cigora. More about them in due course. We're very excited to have our first cigar ad. So this is a big episode for all of us. If for some reason you're not already following us on a streaming service, you can find us everywhere, by the way, from Spotify to iTunes. And if you like what you hear here, please consider giving us a glowing 5-star review on iTunes. If you don't like what you hear here, please forget I said anything. And before we get into it in earnest, here's a message from our first sponsor, Net Choice, a trade organization dedicated to free expression and free enterprise online. Americans are rightly worried about protecting their digital security and privacy, especially with their financial information. But Congress is currently working on a bill that would weaken financial security protections. The Open App Markets Act would compel companies to allow unverified payment systems to operate in their app stores, even if those systems don't comply with important security standards. Right now, leading app stores block unsafe third-party payments to protect consumers from bad actors. But if passed, the Open App Markets Act would make this safety-enhancing provision illegal. Congress and Joe Biden shouldn't make us less secure online. Tell your senators, say no to the Open App Markets Act. So Jim Garrity, we had an interview with Joe Biden on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley. The opening question was about inflation. And Pelley asked, they kind of opened with a vignette about the event last week, the same day as a terrible inflation number and a mini stock market crash. Pelley asked Biden about this, and Biden's like, come on, it just went up an inch. And, from month to month, of course, if you go up an inch every month and you add that up over 12 months, you get 8.3, which is not a great number. And Pelley pushed back saying, you're not saying 8.3 is a great number. He's like, no, I understand. But it goes to how there's really nothing good to say about inflation for Biden or the Democrats. And it doesn't look like it's abating by election day.
So I've been thinking about this exchange, and we have seen this continuing pattern every time Biden sits down and does a formal interview. If Biden were good at interviews, he'd be doing them every week. We know he does them very, very rarely, only a handful in this year, and we're already, well into September. Whether it's the, telling Lester Holt, you're being a wise guy with me, when Lester Holt merely quoted back the inflation figures, Biden's prediction that inflation would be transitory. George Stephanopoulos and that was 4 or 5 days ago. Or when he did his sit down with Jimmy Kimmel, and he just suddenly started rambling about interracial couples in commercials. Biden's mind and he's just not who he used to be. And he wasn't verbally or mentally disciplined when it began. And so he's in this, and he's got this, fairly basic question. I think what comes out in this exchange, and when you see when Biden gets prickly, he's spent decades of his life in the Senate representing the state of Delaware. And at the risk of peeing on all of the good journalists who've worked in Delaware over the years, I don't think Joe Biden ever really had serious, tough scrutiny from his home state press corps. And every time Biden ran for president, all of a sudden he, went from the Superman of the Delaware to this absolute punching bag who just, fell apart under the slightest scrutiny in 1988 and in 2008. So I think Biden is used to being very buddy-buddy with the people around him, including members of the press. And he's like, I know you're being kind of a wise guy with me. Lester, and there's kind of this, he's used to this playfulness. So when he actually gets hit with a tough question, he either is left with nothing, as he did with Pelley. Pelley, was sober, direct, clear, and Biden really had nothing. And we saw another case of this in which Biden really, he's not used to getting that pushback. He's not used to getting that press. And, if he ever had a time where he could think on his feet and come up with a good rejoinder or a good counter argument, guys, those days are long gone.
So speaking of that, was there a beeping?
There was. That was my car informing me that I've received a text.
Okay.
I really love that.
So everyone,
That
Jim's reporting.
that was a Jim's version of Back to You, Rich.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just every time I finish now, Rich, I'm just going to go boop, boop.
So Jim is recording in his car because there's repair work being done in his home. So this brought back memories for me because during most of the pandemic, I was recording from a car, and you worry about, is the heat going to make a sound or the air conditioning make a sound? But Jim, you sound great.
Glad to hear it.
Except for the extraneous beep, which is a charming touch. That
was just me swearing. I was being bleeped for you.
So, Charlie, to this question of Biden's capability, Scott Pelley brought it up and just said, you must know, a lot of people wonder whether you're fit for the job. What do you think about that? How does it make you feel? And Biden said, hey, look, proof's in the pudding. Look, you try to keep my schedule. You might think I'm not up to this, but how can you possibly think that seeing what I do every day, and NATO leaders aren't asking about my age when I'm bringing them all together. So case closed.
Well, is it case closed? We're not talking about a president here who is popular. We're not talking about a president who is regarded as young, virile, coherent, eloquent. And the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? Joe Biden's approval rating is, depends on. I haven't finished yet, Jim's car.
We got a Knight Rider thing going on.
Joe Biden's presidency is hovering at about 38 to 43% approval. He is clearly slurring words. He forgets himself halfway through sentences. He tells peculiar, sometimes inappropriate stories. He struggles to contain his emotions. I mean, people aren't asking this out of nothing. They're asking it because we can see in front of us that he seems too old to be president. And as for his schedule, perhaps he can sustain a meeting with a UN leader or what you will. But he spends a great deal of time on vacation. He spends a great deal of time in Delaware. Now, I don't particularly mind that. I would like the executive branch to be less present. But I don't see a vigorous figure.
And Charlie, for the first time, actually, in this interview, he left the door open to not running again. They've been adamant he's going to run again, but he said in this interview, look, we got to. It's too early to make that decision, and we got to see where things are when I'm going to make that decision. But the first time, implicitly acknowledging that he might not be up for another run.
Well, how old will he be? 82, and it is a really tough job. It's a bit of a stereotype, or I should say a cliche now. But the before and after photographs of presidents are stark. It turns your hair gray, it wrinkles your face, it makes your eyes look tired and weary. And that was true of Barack Obama, who was relatively young when he came into the White House. It was true of George W. Bush, who was relatively young when he came into the White House. It was true of Bill Clinton, who was relatively young when he came into the White House. And Joe Biden would be 82. And he already seems beyond the appropriate age for a president to me. So, yeah, I don't think that Joe Biden is in any position to say, well, those people who are making that criticism are wrong. Just look at me. That's why they're making the criticism.
So, Jack, something that was routine now in this interview was Joe Biden's misstatement of what's supposed to be our Taiwan policy. So basically our Taiwan policy now is for the president of the United States to contradict it and to get his comment walked back immediately. But this is the fourth time he's done it. So it's just extraordinary to keep making this particular mistake over and over again. There's some people who now think maybe it's deliberate. Maybe it's Biden's way of signaling to the Taiwanese, we got your back. The same way at the same time, the administration can tell the Chinese, no, that was just president speaking off the cuff. It's still, we have this policy of strategic ambiguity. but there's no doubt there is ambiguity. Whether the ambiguity now is whether we still have a policy of strategic ambiguity or not.
Yeah, I mean, I feel extremely ambiguous. I mean, we're in this kind of twilight zone now, and if that's that's what is the desired outcome, well, mission accomplished. No, it's actually the reason that this is particularly bad when Biden goes out on this limb and then sort of is walked back, or if it's sawed off, I'm not exactly sure. It's just one of these many instances in which it has to be clarified to Biden what his beliefs or policy on a particular matter are. But here it's particularly bad because this is a high stakes, life and death foreign policy matter of incredible delicacy, that and has been such for 50 years. And we do, as you elaborate, Rich, we do have this policy, the U.S. of strategic ambiguity, but it doesn't really make sense to maintain it in this haphazard fashion. Like, I guess the theory for the people who are attempting to justify this as some kind of deliberate thing, it would be, well, you know, it's a variation of the madman policy, but I guess you'd call it the senile man policy, where the sort of King Lear policy, where you don't know what he's going to do. He's sort of decaying, and so he could do anything. Versus Trump's, like, wow, he very well may actually rain fire and fury down on North Korea or whoever. But no, it just doesn't make sense. This is no way to run a foreign policy apparatus when you have a president acting in this in a way that not only you're not sure what he's going to say on a given day, but you're not sure what the policy, whether it lines up with what the people who are theoretically under him actually believe. And I can't say, like, I haven't talked to any residents of Taiwan lately, but I can't imagine that this is the kind of thing that makes them feel better about their position vis-a-vis China when you have this this deliberate, forced. I don't know if I'm looking for a different word from ambiguity, and I guess I'll settle on twilight zone, because the strategic ambiguity at least has the plausible connection to what has been U.S. policy for several decades. But what Biden has introduced is something different, and it's not something that strikes me as very helpful.
Yeah, so another piece of evidence against the idea that this is deliberate is he misstated another part of the policy as well, which is very sensitive, which is that we don't want Taiwan to be independent. Instead, Biden said sort of what, a common sense statement would be of someone who's not really aware of what the policy is, which, Biden should be. It's their choice. It's their choice to be independent or not. And Charlie, as you know, I have a very robust view of the presidential powers with regard to war making and foreign policy. But this is just something. This is something that shouldn't depend on a president's say-so. If we're going to have a policy of entering into what could be a major war, a war which conceivably could go nuclear against an enormously powerful country, China, there has to be national buy-in and there has to be congressional buy-in. And maybe we're getting a form of that and various resolutions that have been passed over the years, piece of legislation from Congress. There's another one that's working its way through Congress now that would declare Taiwan a major non-NATO ally, which I suppose is a way of saying, we're going to have their back when the time comes. But this is an instant where it just can't depend on the president's opinion, a hugely consequential foreign policy question like this.
Well, as you know, I profoundly agree with that. So you set me up to go off. There is, I think, a case to be made that the president has unilateral powers in such case as the United States is subject to a surprise invasion, where there's no time to convene Congress, where the nation is being threatened, and the commander-in-chief, with the standing Army, Navy, Air Force, and so forth at his disposal, is obliged to decide what to do with it. In the olden days, the militia. But that's not applicable in the case of Taiwan. Taiwan is important, but it's a long, long way away. And because it is important, it is plausible that whatever is done there could lead to a major war. And that major war would fall under the purview of Congress, which, under our constitutional order, enjoys the war-making power. If the United States were invaded without warning, the war would already have started. Congress would, of course, have a role to play, but it would be a fact. If Taiwan were invaded, the response of the United States would be an intrinsically political question. Should we help? Should we not? Should we declare war? Should we provide assistance? Should we provide weapons, money? I suppose the one gray area here is if there are American troops stationed on a base in Taiwan. But even in the case of Pearl Harbor, which was an American base, it still took Congress to declare war against Japan and then Germany. The president did not say, well, they attacked us, therefore we're engaged in a military conflict, therefore we're at war. What we're talking about here is really the seminal geopolitical question of the next 30 years, in my estimation. Russia has obviously stolen the headlines and remains a threat in some sense, and Ukraine is finding that out. But the great power struggle that we are likely to live through for most of the rest of my life is going to be between the United States and China. It's going to take place in the Pacific, and it's going to have, if it ever became hot rather than cold, as its proximate cause, something like an invasion of Taiwan. And for the executive branch to be freelancing policy in this way without congressional involvement, I think is a huge problem, both diplomatically and constitutionally. Of course, Congress has a role to play here too. I would like Congress to do more than merely comment on President Biden's assertions. And it's not just President Biden. And this has been an issue for 20 years. I think last time we talked about this, I pointed out that before 9/11, George W. Bush essentially said the same thing and then had to walk it back. Congress has been absent in war making for a long, long time. It's been absent in this particular question as well. And it would be nice if, instead of playing all sorts of roles that it should not be playing in our life, most of which should be reserved to the states, it decided to do its job. The main part of which is to determine our foreign policy, our treaties, and with which countries we are and are not at war or likely to be at war. So I don't hold Congress blameless. I do think it would be good if that vacuum were filled so that American presidents didn't have to play games with their words.
Yeah, it seems as though the foreseeable thing that would end our status as a superpower would be losing a war with China. So then the options are either being sure you're going to win a war with China or not fighting a war with China over this island in the first place. And it seems to me that either of those options require really being ready, either to detour China, so that it doesn't go after Taiwan in the first place, or make it, even if you're not defending Taiwan directly, making it as hard to absorb as possible, or making it easier to defend if you're going in yourself. And just whatever Biden's saying on any given day, Jim, it just doesn't seem as though we're doing these things with the urgency that is necessary. I mean, we should be flooding the Taiwan with drones and rockets and mines, all the kind of preparatory work that we weren't doing with Ukraine before the Russian invasion, and then making sure that if we are going to end up in a shooting war, that we have the weapons that we need on hand, especially submarines. We're not going to be to build more submarines if China goes after this anytime in the next couple of years. Any subs that we commission aren't going to be built in that time, but we could be repairing our subs more quickly. And if we had subs in the Taiwanese Strait, and China had to worry about that, it would make it a much harder proposition. But at the moment, as a friend was putting it to me, we're talking loudly, at least occasionally, in these interviews from Joe Biden without having much of a stick at all.
Rich, this is one of the weird times where I find myself agreeing at least with Biden's instincts, and write that down because it doesn't happen that often. I do note this is now several times he said this, and a couple times he's indicated that this is something we're obligated to do by treaty, which is not the case. And once again, you start wondering how well Biden knows what his policies are and what the details are.
It's all right, Jim. It's in the 2003 HEROES Act.
Spoiler alert.
I certainly would not want the American president indicating that we would not defend Taiwan. I think that makes a Chinese invasion more likely. But I think this is another case of Biden just kind of blurting out the first thing that pops into his mind. And if our policy is characterized as strategic ambiguity, it's never been more ambiguous than when the president says something clearly and forthrightly on camera, and then somebody from the White House rushes over to say, "Oh, no, the president didn't really mean that. No, he didn't say that." That kind of that just makes him look like a senile old man who does not actually speak for his own administration. So this is a rare case in which I think I prefer the president saying, "Yeah, don't you dare go anywhere near Taiwan." And I don't think it helps to have his staff running out and saying, "Grandpa gets confused. He meant to say the opposite."
So Jack Butler, exit question to you. We'll fight a war with China over Taiwan, yes or no? And you're going to be on the record here, Jack. Everyone's going to remember, so don't mess this up. Yes or no?
So I will say that there will be hostilities that the U.S. will be involved in some way. I'm not sure to what extent. Is that too much of a dodge?
So hostilities will be involved with, does that include arming Taiwan during a conflict, or we're going to be shooting ourselves?
I will hedge somewhat and say at least we will be arming Taiwan. I'm not sure if we'll go all in. I mean, the strategic ambiguity is working, so
Jack has no idea.
If I'm the target of this policy, then it's being completely successful. I have no idea what to make of the situation. But yeah, I will. I sort of have, but given what we've been talking about, I have this concern that we actually don't know as a country what we'll do, and that is a situation that the likeliest thing that will lead to is a initial great confusion and sort of. This is a classic American pattern of us getting knocked over by an initial problem and then suddenly like rising up to confront it in overwhelming fashion. But the problem with this is that there's going to be a window where, like, theoretically, China could just take the island within that window of initial American confusion. And by the time that we're like the sleeping giant is awakened, it could be already over. So that's my concern. So that's where I am.
Charlie Cook?
I don't know. I haven't got a single clue. I have no framework with which to evaluate this.
All right, Jim Garrity, we have an unprecedented 2 I don't knows in a row coming to you.
I'm actually feeling that China is less likely to invade Taiwan, certainly in the next few years. I think the COVID shutdowns of the cities have kind of given them more headaches than they can handle, more stress on their system than they expected to handle. There's always the possibility that Xi Jinping looks at this and says, I know what'll make everybody feel better. A good big nationalistic war to reclaim Taiwan. But I think right now that might be more destabilizing to the regime than the propagandistic, invigorating shot in the arm. So I think China's going to rattle the saber, but I think at least for the next, maybe 5 years at least, they'll continue to kind of bide their time, build up their forces, and think about doing it another day.
Okay, so that's a no based on China not going. I'm a no even if China goes. I just think there's an argument to be made, a good one, that we've already really committed ourselves. If you take the various bills that have passed Congress and whatnot. But I just think push comes to shove, it will be such a huge and risky proposition that will end up not doing it, for better or worse.
Do you think it would be Vietnam?
No. So Vietnam was a costly and grinding conflict. This is a major power war. I mean, this is directly fighting one of North Vietnam's sponsors rather than just having a proxy war. So it's just an entirely different proposition. And the argument of, and I'm undecided on this one, but the argument of the hawks is you can't let Taiwan go because instantly our credibility collapses around the region, and everyone, from the Philippines to Australia, tilts China's way because they realize they can't trust or rely on us anymore. The counter to that is, well, look what's happened in Ukraine. You get a belligerent revisionist power waging a war of aggression, and then everyone else gets freaked out and falls into our arms because they realize there's no alternative. I think that's the latter scenario. I think is a little more likely.
I guess the argument, the counter to that is that China is in a sort of better position militarily, strategically than Russia is.
Yeah, and they have more influence because they're able to buy people off, in a way Russia isn't. Russia has the oil and gas weapon, but China, is everywhere around the world is making its presence felt just because it has the financial wherewithal. I don't know. It's a tricky one. Obviously, we'll be discussing it more, but what's not tricky is that Quip is a fantastic product for your oral health. Good health starts, of course, with good habits. Quip makes it easy by delivering all the oral care essentials you need to care for your mouth. The Quip electric toothbrush is loved by over 7 million mouths and has timed sonic vibrations with 30-second pulses to guide a dentist recommended 2-minute clean. A lightweight and sleek design, both for kids and adults, with no wires or bulky charger to weigh you down, a multi-use travel cover that doubles as a mirror mount for less clutter, reusable handles, and a range of sleek metal hues, including best-selling all black and all pink, as well as bright plastic colors, sure to make a pop to your bathroom counter. On top of your brushing, you can upgrade your Quip with a new smart motor to track and improve your brushing with the free Quip app. Earn amazing rewards like free refills, products, Target gift cards, and more. Beyond the brush, Quip has everything you need to build a complete routine, including refillable gum that's sugar-free, that has a long-lasting mint flavor, and that comes with a dispenser, and refillable mouthwash that's a 4-time concentrate, plus good for you and the planet. In addition to brush heads, Quip also delivers fresh floss, toothpaste, mouthwash, and gum refills every 3 months from $5. Shipping is free. So you can save money and skip the hustle and bustle of in-store shopping with stylish and affordable electric brushes starting at just $25. You won't be paying through the teeth for better oral health. If you go to getquip.com/editors right now, you'll get your first refill free. That's your first refill free at getquip.com/editors, spelled getquip.com/editors. Quip, the good habits company. Please check it out. So, Jack, we have more fallout from the Operation Martha's Vineyard, where Ron DeSantis got flights from, I think, at least one emanating from San Antonio, maybe both, and shipped 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard, causing outrage throughout progressive America. A couple arguments that developed over the weekend on this. I'll start just with one for you, and then get the legal one, get Charlie in on the legal one. So one argument is, oh, look, you idiots, you thought Martha's Vineyard was going to explode in xenophobia and not want any of these migrants around. Instead, they rallied. You had the high school students who take Spanish running to the side of these migrants to translate for them. You had all sorts of volunteers showing up. And when they were packed off to the airbase in Cape Cod, people were there cheering and laughing and giving gift bags to these migrants. So it just shows how generous and wonderful the people of Martha's Vineyard have been, and they actually say in interviews they were enriched by this entire experience. So it really shows how the border states and other places in America that aren't so thrilled with these migrants, and in fact are hatefully shipping them elsewhere, are really the ones that should be embarrassed by what's happened here.
Yeah, so enriched that I guess the residents of Martha's Vineyard were able to extract all of the riches they needed from the experience of cultural contact, and then ship the migrants off elsewhere. Yeah, there were some photogenic displays of charity. Those are nice. Those circulate well on social media and online. But apparently, the charity of Martha's Vineyard has very strictly circumscribed limits, and we saw what the limits of those are. Those migrants are now off of the island, and yeah, so you have some virtue signaling capacity among the residents. They're great. But what I think has been actually demonstrated by this process is precisely the point that border and immigration hawks have been making all this time, which is that on the left, there is a large ability to virtue signal. There's a large ability to sort of make flagrant and flamboyant declarations about openness. There's a great willingness to put signs in people's yards saying that everyone is welcome here, hate has no home here. But when push comes to shove, when rubber meets the road, there's actually a quite limited capacity for the kind of generosity that is sort of expected and demanded of people who actually have to experience the reality of this problem on a daily basis in border states. And I think that's one of the ultimate demonstrations and takeaways of this ploy by border state governors like Abbott, and now sort of, I guess, honorary border state governor Ron DeSantis, now that he's inserted himself into this mix, which is that this is a real problem, and it is a real problem. We just got August numbers suggesting that it's a problem that's not going anywhere, that is dealt with regularly by people in other states, and the places that are most content to virtue signal about it are the ones that actually have to deal with it way less. And so this is just a kind of small way to sort of spread the problem around and to make clear the reality of the sort of nebulous realm of unlaw that we're living in as a result of failure to enforce immigration policies. I mean, that is the reason all of this is happening. And this is just an example of the distortions that have been introduced in a kind of cascading fashion from this failure to actually have border laws. And I don't actually think this is an example of compassion to not do this, because there's by not having clear laws and by not enforcing them, people come to this country without on false pretenses. They are forced into situations either by traffickers or in sort of the maxed capacity of our border enforcement that are not, I mean, to say the least, conducive to human flourishing. So I think it's just at the very least limited, if not outright false compassion of people who like to virtue signal on this issue has been exposed. However many photogenic images of sort of momentary, temporary acts of charity circulate on social media.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's not as though the border areas and border towns are kicking these migrants to the curb. They just have limited capacity.
Right.
The same way Martha's Vineyard has limited capacity, so they wanted them to go over to Cape Cod. The same way New York City and Washington, D.C. have limited capacity, so they're yelping in pain over these thousands of migrants who are being bussed from Texas and Arizona. So, Charlie, on the legal question, a lot of loose talk. DeSantis is guilty of trafficking. He's guilty of kidnapping. There have been reports suggesting that these migrants were lured into taking this trip on false pretenses, given all sorts of promises about the assistance that would be there for them. On the other hand, on the other end, and you have the DeSantis folks saying, well, actually, these people are sleeping on the streets in San Antonio, and we're happy to take this trip. Both of those can be true, but what do you make of the legal question?
From what I understand, the idea that this was illegal is pretty weak, and that assumes that the fact patterns that we've been told in support of the idea that it's somehow illegal are correct, and that's unclear as well. I just don't care very much about this. That doesn't mean I don't think it's an interesting story. I just find it so hard to get het up about 50 people, given the scale of what's happened on the border for the last decade or more. I think it's annoying. And the ploy worked, as Jack says, because suddenly you had all of these people, and not just in Martha's Vineyard, they're really a sideshow, but these people in the press and in politics saying the exact same things that have been said at the Texas border, the Arizona border for years, as if they just thought of them. Mm-hmm. Well, of course we had to send them out after a day. This is a small community. We don't have this or that. We can't sustain an influx of illegal immigrants or asylum seekers. I think there's a mixture. Yeah, we know. So I think rhetorically it worked and was beneficial. But whatever the downsides of it, it's annoying being lectured about this, I'm afraid. The gall of those standing on their soapbox. I saw Catherine Rampell of the Washington Post saying, well, this costs taxpayers money. Come on. I complain about the president of the United States stealing $1 trillion to give to college students. And I'm told, this is a rich country, you know. This $690,000 is going to break the budget. Florida, third most populous state in the union. Would I have spent that money? Probably not. Do I want to be lectured by people who 10 minutes ago were suggesting we spend $6 trillion we don't have on every goodie under the sun? No. It's a drop in the ocean. And it's the same with these 50 people. It's a drop in the ocean. It's a drop in a sea. It's about as many people as arrive in Yuma every 45 minutes. And no one cares about it. So unless there was some horrendous crime here, and I can't see any evidence that there was, why should I care about this when no one cares about the bigger issue? No one cares about the illegality. No one cares whether the administration is fulfilling its constitutional responsibility to execute the laws that were passed by Congress. No one seemed to care 10 years ago when the Obama administration, with the stroke of a pen, nullified a whole bunch of our immigration law and said that en masse, the president could just refuse to enforce the law for whole classes of people who would then be given papers that Congress had not allowed for. And Ron DeSantis sends 50 people to Martha's Vineyard, and this is Hitlerian. Greg Abbott puts people on buses to New York City. And this is cruelty? No. Come on. I can't bring myself to take this critique seriously. And I think on balance, the effect that Abbott and DeSantis wanted has been achieved. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good thing that it's been achieved.
So, Charlie, my standard here is I really prefer that the migrants have totally signed up and know where they're going. That's what Texas and Arizona are doing. Arizona adds another element, which I also think is desirable and makes for a really sound approach, just telling the officials and the volunteer organizations on the other end that a bus is heading there, so they're prepared to meet these people. But the fact is, busing is going on all the time outside of these Arizona and Texas programs. DHS is overwhelmed by the influx of migrants at the border. They hand them off to private groups in San Antonio or wherever else, and the private groups ask the migrant, where do you want to go? These are illegal immigrants. These are illegal immigrants. Where do you want to go in the United States? We'll get you on a Greyhound or we'll get you on a charter bus. You just need to pay for the ticket. So have someone wire you the money. So there's no difference in kind, perhaps in degree. It's a bunch of migrants showing up at once off these Texas and Arizona buses, but they're being spread all around the country anyway.
Yeah, well, Texas and Arizona are pretty used to a whole bunch of migrants showing up at once without notice. And it's hilarious to listen to cities complain. Well, we just got these people. They just arrived. We didn't know they were coming. We can't support them. Whereas what? Poor border towns can. But I think it's important to make people live up to their own promises and their own rhetoric. And I agree with you. Probably the way Arizona is doing this is best. But what do northeastern states think they're conveying when they call themselves sanctuaries? What do they think the word means? So let's suppose you have some cynical governor who says you should go up north because there no human is illegal, and love lives there, and they will look after you just like Jesus did, as if you were their own child, and you won't be arrested. You won't even be asked questions. In fact, you can get a driver's license. There's no e-verify. That's cruel. You could probably get a job. That's where you should go. Which part of that description does not comport with the way that people talk in New York and California? It's almost as if that is a problem when critics notice it. We're seeing this at the moment online, where that account, Libs of TikTok, will put up exactly the same video that some Boston hospital publishes, not edited, no commentary over it, not abridged. They'll just put up the video and say, this is bad. And there's this howl of complaint. Oh my God, this is so dangerous. What, the people have noticed? This, I'm afraid, is the logical conclusion of the way that certain people and communities and politicians and political parties talk about this issue in this country. The problem is not that those who disagree have started trolling. The problem is the policy. And yeah, you can, if you want to, you can find fault. I'm sure if I were asked in a vacuum, do you like this or that about this particular shipping of people, then I would have some criticisms. I just think that at a certain point, there is going to be a collision in this area because public opinion and the behavior of politicians are utterly out of sync, and that can't go on forever. And as I said last week, I think this is a cry for help. Much more so from Greg Abbott, from Governor Ducey in Arizona than from Ron DeSantis. And nevertheless,
a lot of them do end up in Florida.
Yeah.
It is one of the top.
No, it is.
Top
It is, and as I say, more so. Not. It's not DeSantis doesn't have to deal with this, but it's more so. Texas is really the front line of it.
Yeah.
But again, I just put your money where your mouth is.
So let's go exit question to Jim Garrity. We didn't get Jim on the body of this discussion because he's been moving back and forth from his car to his house, trying to find a quiet place with good service, which he has now, at least for the moment. So Jim, exit question to you. Rate the success of the Ron DeSantis Martha's Vineyard operation from 0 to 10. 0, a complete flop. 10, a brilliant success.
An 8. It's pretty good. Oh, by the way, if I'd been speaking in the body of this debate, I would have mentioned that apparently Rehoboth Beach is the rumored next destination for a plane load of migrants. If I were a border state Democrat, I would be very nervous right now. I think reaction.
So is Rehoboth now considered? Is that just because Biden goes there? Or?
Yeah. The idea is to drop them off in front of Biden's house.
Yeah, I went to Rehoboth as a kid, and I never thought of it as like being the equivalent of Martha's Vineyard. We weren't staying in very fancy lodging. That's for sure. But Jack Butler, 0 to 10.
I'd also put it at an 8. I mean, I have slight reservations about the idea of people being used as political pawns here. I think that's sort of an overblown complaint, but it is sort of in the back of my mind something to think about. But that's part of the broader consequence of the sort of realm of unlaw that we've entered on this issue. So
Unlaw is a good word for it. Charlie Cook?
So, funnily enough, having given somewhat of a defense of it, I actually would be lower than 8. I would give it a 6 because I think it has achieved its primary aim, which is to get people outside of the front lines of this issue to care about it and to provoke people who usually speak in platitudes to say out loud all of the things that have been said in exasperation in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and Florida to some extent and elsewhere. But I think it has galvanized the opponents of strict immigration enforcement as well. It's not just the Abbott or DeSantis camps that have benefited from this. It's the left. And the historical sign of a good policy or a good stunt is that you have a 70-30 issue, at least, that makes the other side want to shut up or talk about something else. And I don't think this is one of those. I think that the other side is loving this. Whether or not that will be borne out in the polls, I have absolutely no idea. I don't know what the polling will look like on this, but I don't think it can be an 8 for that reason. But I will give it a 6. I think it was better than worse.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Charlie. I would go probably 7 or 8. I have a friend who is privy to polling, and this firm asked the question, and I'm not sure the exact wording, but showed 63% support, not necessarily for the Martha's Vineyard, but for the busing in general. I'm more, maybe a tick lower than Jim and Jack, just because I do think this is going to trail DeSantis a little bit. There are legal questions, I think mostly meritless, but they're going to come at him, and maybe that's a good thing for DeSantis's purposes. Just as much controversy around this as possible, the better in terms of internal Republican politics. But it is a complicating factor. But for me, the real tell was on this State of the Union interview on CNN. Jake Tapper had Mayor Eric Adams, and Adams is like, this is a humanitarian crisis. This is terrible. We need all sorts of assistance. Everyone needs to be working together here. And Tapper says, oh, so you do think this is a crisis at the border that, Joe Biden should focus on more. And Adams like, no, I'm not saying that at all. So, if I could do Jim's car tone, ding, 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 that's the winning play to force these folks into an unsustainable position, which maybe, I don't think it's going to happen, but at least creates more political pressure for Biden to do more at the border to try to control the situation at its source. With that, let's hear from our next sponsor. We know it can be difficult to make time for ourselves in this fast-paced world we live in. The stress of work, family, and the seemingly never-ending list of responsibilities we face every day are bound to take their toll. So take a step back and enjoy the finer things in life with Cigora, the next generation of cigars online. Join Cigora and be the first to see cutting-edge products, exclusive offers, and limited edition gear. Whether you're looking for top-shelf brands like Davidoff, industry staples like Fuente, or super rare blends like Viaje, Cigora is your one-stop shop for all your cigar needs. Explore its curated selection of industry content that includes reviews, food and beverage pairings, beginner questions, and much more. Join the Cigora Lounge and connect with fellow cigar enthusiasts alongside its staff, experts, and manufacturers, and be a part of a one-of-a-kind cigar community. Give back to yourself. Visit Cigora.com. That's Cigora.com, and use the checkout code REVIEW10. That's REVIEW10 to receive 10% off your first purchase. Cigora. Shop, connect, share. Do yourself a favor, everyone, and please check it out. So, Jim, we're going to go back to Biden's 60 Minutes interview, which was very briefly teased by Jack Butler in our first segment. His pandemic answer: he's with Scott Pelley at the Detroit Auto Show, first time in 3 years. Pelley asks, is the pandemic over? And Biden's like, yeah, it is over. Look, no one's wearing masks and everyone is fine. So this is a new note from President Biden also, and we'll get Charlie on this more in a minute, contradictory to his administration's policies in many respects. What did you make of it?
So I wrote about this in today's Morning Jolt. And once again, Biden is blurting out whatever kind of comes into his mind. Now, you can make an argument. Yes, of course. For most people, the daily impact of COVID-19 is gone. And we can argue about when things started feeling like they were back to normal. I think you can point it to the end of the Omicron wave in January or February of this year. In June, they stopped the vaccination and negative test requirements for coming back into the United States for international flights. That was one of the last big, restrictions or regulations that was in our lives. I actually think if you want to say when was the pandemic over, actually, I think it's when Virginia Democrats folded to Glenn Youngkin on the issue of masking of kids in schools. That was a sign that we were okay as a society. You handle the risk for yourself. We're going back to normal. The COVID-19 pandemic era, has come to an end. But Biden, also, as Charlie very eloquently and passionately laid out earlier this week, he's using the COVID-19 pandemic as a justification for the student loan forgiveness. So it's both over, and yet they have to do this because of the continuing effects of COVID-19. The administration is still in court arguing that the CDC has the right to require masks on airplanes because of the risk of COVID-19. The administration wants, $20-some billion in additional funding to fight COVID-19 in the coming year. And just generally the entire public health administration was like, actually, no, it's not over. It's not over. Fauci came out and said, well, actually, no, it's not over. Now, I would point out, by the way, COVID-19, people are still having cases. There are still people who are dying both of and with COVID-19 because of the record keeping. It is not easy to, it's not as clear as it should be, which one is which. I don't think they're counting the, motorcycle accidents, but when somebody who's elderly or immunocompromised gets COVID, sometimes it's COVID-19, sometimes it's other factors. Sometimes it's a combination of both, like in the case of Colin Powell. I do think this coming winter, you're going to see more cases of COVID-19. Hopefully, and you can hear me knocking on wood there, most of these are going to be very mild. It's going to seem like a typical winter cold or, like flu season. And most people are going to pull through it just fine. And we will continue to live what feels like a relatively normal life. But, this is a country that has elderly people. This is a country of people who has immunocompromised, and they might have a little bit more to worry about than your average person when it comes to a COVID-19 infection. Lots of people have had vaccinations. Lots of people have had boosters. Lots of people have had previous infections, giving their immune systems some degree of preparation and experience against this kind of virus. Is there a risk of additional different variants? Yeah. And Fauci talked a bit about that yesterday. We're going to have to keep waiting and seeing. But my guess is if you've fought off a previous case of COVID-19, you're reasonably prepared for the next infection, but stay tuned and pay attention to stuff. So once again, Biden's mouth got himself in trouble. It's a little kind of surprising because, this is a bigger issue than usual. And this is the one where he talked about, I'm always going to trust the experts and I'm never going to contradict the experts. And then he goes out and contradicts all of his, top advisors.
So, Charlie, you pointed out that this directly contradicts the justification for the student loan jubilee, which is supposed to be, under the aforementioned HEROES Act of 2003, an emergency measure to hold harmless millions of people who supposedly weren't able to pay or aren't able to pay their student loans back because of the pandemic.
Yes, it needs to be said once again that the argument that the OLC made about the nature of the 2003 HEROES Act is in and of itself wrong, willfully wrong. The 2003 HEROES Act does not confer this power upon the president. But even if it did, which it doesn't, there would need to be an emergency in place to sustain the order. And President Biden said on 60 Minutes that there was no such emergency, and thereby confirmed that he is violating the Constitution, and in my view, should be impeached for it. I think this is a classic case of follow the money. President Biden has conflicting prerogatives. On the one hand, he needs the pandemic to be over because the American public wants it to be over. It will be good for his presidency in general if the pandemic were over. On the other hand, President Biden has a 50-50 Senate, a close House. He's coming up against midterms in which he may well lose both. He is unpopular. He has not a great deal of formal political authority, and the pandemic is the best thing that has ever happened to him because it confers upon him, in some cases legitimately, in some cases illegitimately, a great deal more power than the president usually has. The Washington Post, in an almost lachrymose tone, pushed back against the idea that the pandemic was over yesterday, noting, and I'll read this, Mr. Biden has not ended the official pandemic emergency. When the official emergency ends, some 15 million will lose Medicaid coverage. The reason for a student loan repayment pause will end. The rationale for Trump-era border restrictions, still held in place by a court, will disappear. All this policy transition must not be done carelessly or hastily. In other words, please don't say out loud, Mr. President, that the pandemic is over. It's terrible for progressivism. Now, of course, the Biden administration is already trying to have it both ways legally. The Washington Post is correct to say that the Trump-era border restrictions, that's Title 42, still held in place by a court, will disappear. But the Biden administration has already tried to make them disappear, and it has argued in front of that court that the pandemic is over. We've already got Schrodinger's pandemic from Biden. But what we have here is a political and a policy fight. Biden is quite happy to say casually the pandemic is over, but he needs it not to be over in certain circumstances to keep the money flowing and to keep his powers up. Now, I think this should outrage anyone who cares about separation of powers and about the limits on Article 2. How dare he stand there on 60 Minutes and say, oh, that's over, while trying to spend up to $1 trillion without Congress on the grounds that not only is there an emergency, but that this emergency has so damaged not just some, but every single student who has student debt, whose household income is below $250,000, $250,000. How dare he do that? That is a violation of his oath of office and a violation of the promises that he made. And if the standing question is resolved, and I have no idea if it will be, and there is a live court case, I expect this will come up. Biden will already be in a difficult position because his administration has argued, related to Title 42, that the pandemic is over. I put in the corner post Jim's referring to the DOJ statement, which is very indignant, talks about the expertise of the CDC deciding that the pandemic is no longer sufficiently serious for emergency powers at the border. And this is within the CDC's authority to make this determination, the DOJ says. He also is now saying in public, the pandemic has gone. I can't see him prevailing, but he's trying to do it is a disgrace.
So, Jack Butler, exit question to you. When COVID cases inevitably spike this winter, it will be handled like a routine illness or prompt new pandemic measures of the sort we've experienced over the last 2 years?
Routine illness. I think that the American public has largely moved on from the sort of state of exception that has been forced upon it for a long period of time, outside of the readouts of what our colleague Phil Klein calls Fauci-stan. So, yeah, I think that people are ready to move to a sort of living with COVID, shall we say. And I think that's to the good, not merely for just the more ordinary reasons, but also because I think this has been a lousy period for a kind of constitutional hygiene. And I think that period has revealed that consider COVID another realm of unlaw in addition to immigration, where it's been unearthed that there are apparently all these magical powers that governing bodies get to wield if they can divine a sufficient justification for them. I think that it should be in the following era should be a period where we sort of clean out our laws of such ambiguous statutes and prevent their future abuse.
Jim Garrity, routine or pandemic-like measures?
I'll largely concur with Jack. We should be at routine. There really isn't a good justification for it. We'll see what this winter holds, but by and large, we should be coming through this okay. But there's always a chance there's another variant or something that does alter the dynamics here. But I think the American people were pretty much done with this. If not, in 2021, then certainly at the beginning of this year, once the Omicron wave passed.
Charlie Cook?
Apparently both. He'll probably say in public, don't worry, it's nothing. It's just like a cold, and then tell a court that that's why he had to bomb every other tree in the state of Mississippi.
I think it'll be mostly routine, but it'll depend on where you live, and we'll see a return of the pandemic type measures in certain places. With that, let me do a quick plug for NR Plus digital subscription service at nationalreview.com. Your way around our metered paywall. Your way, if you sign up and log in, to see 90% fewer ads, especially no longer see the most annoying and obnoxious ads. Your way to dig deeper into our community. You can comment on articles and blog posts. You can be part of a private Facebook group. We have quite a robust group there. You can be invited to special calls and events. None of this will cost you an arm and a leg, and very importantly is a crucial way to support our valuable journalism. So if you haven't already signed up for NR Plus, urge you, I lobby you, I officially twist your arm, dear listeners, to please sign up and join tens of thousands of your fellow National Review readers as an NR Plus member. Let's hit a few other things before we go. Jim Garrity, Jets, Jets.
I was going to say the ending of last weekend's Jets-Browns game was so shocking. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, but I think shock was the more overwhelming emotion over enjoyment. In fact, I had a good rant stored up, fuming at Jets head coach Robert Saleh, who had complained that his team keeps being underestimated and trashed and mocked, and that his team he is keeping receipts on all those people who'd been laughing at the Jets. And I was like, you know what? Stop telling us how great you're going to be someday. Go out and win a game. And lo and behold, they actually did it. It did require them to have a busted coverage, huge touchdown, then recover an onside kick, then make a second drive to go down, score another touchdown to take the lead, causing me to scream so loud everybody in the entire restaurant and bar turned around, thinking I was having a heart attack.
Congratulations. Also, Charlie Cook, you got a one in the W column too.
Jags, as well as Jets. But this one was a blowout. I mean, I think in many ways it would have been much more exciting to have a game like Jim's, because when you win, what was it, Jim, 31-30, then you're on the verge of a heart attack for the whole game. But it was nice to watch the Jaguars and think, oh, this is what it's like to support an NFL team, which has not been my experience in the last few years. They actually acted like a normal outfit. The defense was good. They looked great going forwards. They managed to shut out the Colts. Here's a fun fact for you. The Colts have been shut out only 3 times in the last 2 decades, and every single time it's been by the Jaguars.
And the Colts, a lot of people were picking them to win the AFC South.
Well, who knows? They may still. I think they were down a few players, but they didn't show up, and the Jaguars did. And I thought watching it that if you've supported a really good team your whole life and then they become bad, then you would think, well, this is teaching me empathy. I now get to see the other side of the line. But for me, having been on the other side of the line since I really got into the NFL, I felt no such emotions, and I felt no such need for magnanimity either. I thought, this is what it feels like to win, and it felt pretty great.
I think the best time to be rooting for a team is when they begin to get good again after a period of being in the cellar. Jack Butler, while Jim and Charlie were wasting their time watching NFL games, you were eating pizza on a beach.
I was. I will have a brief digression on this, however, because I just looked up the Bengals schedule. This shows how bad of a Cincinnati native I am. The Bengals are playing the Jets this Sunday, so Jim and I might have to hate each other depending on what happens. But yes, I was briefly in Florida last week, and sort of in the evening, once the sun started to go down, I got a pizza, a Queen Elizabeth pizza. I'm not sure why it was called that.
I think it's because she just died.
No, it was on the menu, and the menu was. Have you noticed this? Is this what Florida pizza places are doing, Charlie? Are they changing items on their menu to be named after the Queen?
No, where I live in North Florida, we only change our menu items for real heroes like Gardner Minshew.
Oh wow!
So what is on a Queen Elizabeth pizza?
Just chicken and mushrooms. It was good, but I just couldn't figure out why it was named after her. But no, eating it on the beach, hearing the waves, eating the slices. It was a pleasant experience.
Wow. This is so evocative.
I'm trying to make this a total word.
You're not selling my state particularly well, Jack, I have to say.
Well, maybe there's a reason for that.
Look, Queen Elizabeth pizza on the beach. So I participated last Friday, which was Constitution Day, and a debate over originalism at the Constitution Center, which is a great place, and an even greater place now that they've taken the First Amendment wall that used to be outside the museum in Washington and placed it in this gigantic wall in their facility. Jeffrey Rosen, the president there, great guy, fair-minded guy, loves discussion and debate. So we had one on originalism with Emily Bazelon and a couple other folks. And for me, it just comes down to the argument they make against the originalist justices is, well, this isn't really originalism that they're doing. So there are either two approaches there. One, you can say, yeah, and they're doing what they should do, and we want justices to do, which is impose their values based on their policy preferences, which case you have no grounds to complain in principle. You're just complaining that their values and policy preferences are different than yours. Or you can say, okay, they have fallen down on their originalism in certain cases, and I think that it's exaggerated to what extent they have fallen down on their originalism. And then you can say, well, they need to be more originalist, which I think is the right answer. Anyway, it was a great discussion and a great time. It's that time, speaking of time, in this podcast for our editor's picks. Jim Garrity, what's your pick?
Rich, I'm glad you went to me first because I have a feeling a lot of folks might want to do this. And this way I get to nail it. I get to have it first. Phil Klein with a very sharp observation about Liz Cheney and a recent comment she made about Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. In a way, this is the single most backhanded defense of Kevin McCarthy you could imagine. But I do think this is a testament to how Phil looks at things clearly and does not always decide to sign on to the conventional wisdom of this. And he points out McCarthy is leader of House Republicans only in title. He doesn't really have the power to stake out a position and sway the rest of the caucus to his position. And if he had done what Liz Cheney had wanted after January 6th, he still would not have rallied enough House Republicans against Trump, and he probably would have been ousted from leadership the same way she was. So her assessment of him is really not quite that accurate, but in a very strange way, it's kind of a defense of McCarthy, saying, really, he's not the problem. He has absolutely no influence over anything.
I buy a version of that argument. I have this discussion with people a lot. If everyone in the Republican Party, every elected official were instantly anti-Trump, or if all the ones who are just playing around and are insincere were suddenly sincere about their views, they'd all lose in primaries, and it would lead to the instant magnification of the party. So there just is a practical consideration there that the likes of Kevin McCarthy are considering. Jack Butler, what's your pick?
So I'm going to exercise submissions editor privilege here, and you'll see what I mean in a second. The pick that I have that has already been published is Richard M. Reinsch, What the Constitution Can Give Us, published over the weekend. A great meditation on the kind of deliberative model that the Constitution imparted and created for the United States, and the imperative for us to live up to it. And my submissions editor privilege here, Armand White, our great culture critic, has just filed a review of The Woman King, this new ahistorical film, and I cannot wait to see what he has to say about it. I just can't wait. And
that's great. So this is the first pick that a picker has not actually read.
I don't know if that's true. I think that Michael Brennan Doherty did this before. At one point.
Maybe there is.
There are editors lore masters who will clarify this one way or the other. I'm sure.
So Charlie Cook, do you have an unprecedented pick for us?
Nope, I have your piece actually. What's wrong with illegal immigrants? Which I think we've just discussed most of the themes, but there is such a gap between the rhetoric on this and the reality. And I thought you did a great job highlighting that.
Thank you, Charlie. So my pick is by Edward Ring. He is out at the California Policy Center. If you don't know about our friends at the California Policy Center and you're out there in the Golden State, I highly urge you to become familiar with their really important work. And he has a excellent piece on dams. So this is another case of environmentalists pursuing an irrational, anti-development, anti-human, anti-energy policy. And they basically want to do with dams what they've done with nuclear power plants. Ed has obviously thought about this a lot, and you can see it in this piece. So that's it for us. You've been listening to a National Review podcast, and your rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this game without the express written permission of National Review Magazine is strictly prohibited. This podcast has been produced by the incomparable Sarah Schutte, who makes us sound better than we deserve. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jackie B. And thanks to NetChoice, Quip, and Cigaro. And thanks especially to all of you for listening. We're the editors. We'll see you next time.